I just got joined by producer Kevin. She's doing okay. I won't say great, but she's doing okay. Hey, CNFers. The front runner strides into fall, and I've got 3 events in September. Depending on when you listen to this, tomorrow and Sunday. September 20th, I'll be at the Coos Bay Public Library for an author talk at 2 p.m. I think it goes to 4 o'clock. Lovely. September 21st, the Sunday, I'll be in Portland in conversation at the Oregon Historical Society at 2 p.m. And on September 27th, I'll be a featured author alongside Ruby McConnell for the Florence Festival of Books in Florence, Oregon, on the Oregon coast, on the beautiful Oregon coast. It's all day, but the conversation's at 4:30 p.m. I have a total of 4 lined up in Idaho the first week of October, but I'll clue you in as we get closer to those days. Starting next week, I'll let you know. So stay plugged in to this place, my newsletters, and BrendanOmara.com. Hey. Secondarily, on Instagram at Creative Nonfiction Podcast. And we got a call for submissions. The audio magazine is back, and the theme is codes. Codes of conduct. Man. The Mandalorian and his kind live by a simple code, always punctuated by saying, "This is the way." What codes do you live by? What codes were you at one time or another told to live by? Has a code led you down the right path or down the wrong? Essay should be no longer than 2,000 words. I word count right off the top. Don't fuck with that word count. 15-minute read. Bear in mind that in the end, these are audio essays. Write accordingly. Email submissions with codes in the subject line to creativenonfictionpodcast@gmail.com. Original, previous, unpublished work only. Por favor, deadline is October 31st, 2025. There is cash on the line, so give me your best. The Omara grant is funding this thing. Give me your best fully formed pieces, man. And if you want to help put money in the pockets of writers and help the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/CNFpod, because we all need that burrito money.
Which would I rather do, kind of go down with the ship of this story or kind of jump ship and go to like a different story? And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to go to a different story. And I just had to trust it.
Oh, hey, CNF. This is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to primarily writers about the art and craft of telling true stories. I'm Brendan O'Mara. Let's try and keep our chins up, okay? Okay. It's another Supersize Me CNFin double feature, Friday, episode 491, with Tracy Slater. She is the author of Together in Manzanar, the true story of a Japanese Jewish family in an American concentration camp. It's published by Chicago Review Press. As Tracy and I talk about in this podcast, this book is sadly of the moment. It happened 80-some years ago during the height of World War II. This vile incarceration of Japanese immigrants and Japanese Americans. 2/3 of them who were rounded up and incarcerated were American citizens. Rounded up and shipped to American concentration camps. Can you believe it? Disgusting and disgraceful. But these are the histories we need to look dead in the eye. These are the histories this administration aims to erase. So it's the work of historians and journalists and storytellers like Tracy to keep these stories alive. And we must applaud them, and we must support them and spread the word and put these books in people's hands. Yes, feel the shame. Let it wash all over us. But learn from it. Shame metabolized into progress. But these are very, very trying times, CNFers. Show notes to this episode and more at BrendanOmara.com. Hey, there you can peruse for hot blogs, tasteful nudes, and sign up for my 2 very important newsletter, the flagship Rage Against the Algorithm and Pitch Club. Would love for Pitch Club to catch fire. Let's keep doing it. Maybe book pitches, agent pitches, radio pitches, doc film pitches, maybe my Prefontaine book proposal, maybe the next book proposal, which I'm in the throes of, if and when it sells. It'll sell. It's got to sell. Yeah. Pitch Club will never cost a dime. I have a long-form journalist, primarily, share a pitch with me, and they audio annotate it. So you read a little, you listen a little, and you learn a lot. Never cost a dime. All I ask is for your permission, because platform is currency. That I can leverage into dollar bills, y'all. Both are first of the month, no spam, so far as I can tell. You can't beat them. Also, if you care to support the podcast with a few dollar bills, you can visit patreon.com/CNFpod. There are some rad perks. But for the most part, people are just happy throwing a few bucks into my guitar case, you know? And to that, I say thank you. So Tracy's here. She's an American writer from Boston. You remember the horrible Sam Adams commercials, as if this is your cousin from Boston, as if that's a Boston accent. Fuck that guy. Seriously, and fuck Sam Adams. Oh, I'm sorry. I drank a lot of Sam Adams in my time. Yeah, but you know what? Fuck Sam Adams. Where was I? She's an American writer from Boston, living for a bit in Toronto, and even for a time in Japan. Her husband's native land. Her essays and articles have been published in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the Boston Globe, LitHub, among other places. She's also the author of the memoir The Good Shufu. In this conversation, we talk about how she broke up with her first agent, how sadly of the moment together in Manzanar is, being a white person writing the story and worrying about blind spots, how she handled the overwhelm of the book writing, and how the stories often choose her. She also thanked me and the podcast in her acknowledgments of this book, which is really sweet. It made me feel good. As you know, CNFers, this podcast often feels pretty unidirectional. So to know that it's working or that it's of use and helpful, that's awfully validating. You can learn more about Tracy at tracyslater.com. Follow her on Blue Sky at tracyslater.bsky.social or on Instagram at good_shufu. I don't know about you, but I'm ready for this. Parting shot on Squishy Time. And now here's Tracy Slater. Riff.
Is this a podcast where I can swear? That's the dumbest fucking shit.
Total ego goblin.
Just kind of a sloppy person.
So true. I actually would not mind just growing people's flowers for them.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
Once we get our heads out of our asses about book sales and stuff like that, like the real victory is just to be able to keep doing this again and again. And to be able to, to just chain smoke these things.
Yeah, I don't even aim to chain smoke it. I just aim to get, I had 10 years between my first book and my second book, and I'm only on my second book.
Yeah, so, I got 14 between my first published one and this one. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I mean, you know, I am a totally addicted listener to your podcast. And one of the things I really value about the things that you've talked about with your guests and that people have been really honest about is, you know, the ways in which we support our writing financially, not from book deals. So I have a husband who earns enough of an income that I don't have to support our family financially from my writing. So I'm aware that that is a huge privilege and a huge benefit, and that that's a major reason why I'm not worried about like chain smoking one project to the next, because I have the luxury of not, you know, being worried about my family's livelihood in between books. I do just think of it as I just want to be able to get another book contract, and I know partly I feel like that's lucky and a privilege, and partly I feel like that's just totally realistic. I don't really think that there's kind of there's no other way to strategize. I feel like in this industry, there are certainly some people, especially in like some genre fiction or something, who can make a living from their writing, but I don't even think you can strategize that. I think you just get lucky. And I think in like narrative nonfiction, that it's very, very few people who can do that. So I love the process of researching a book. I love the process of, you know, going through the archives. I love the process of just having this sense, almost like in my lizard brain, like almost a pre-verbal sense that there's something about a specific story that I have fallen in love with and that grabs me. And I love the experience of trying to kind of chip away at that until I can put it into words and hopefully have someone else become kind of enraptured by the story in the same way. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm aiming for, is to be able to keep doing it.
Yeah, and what are some of the lessons that you took in those interstitial years from your first book to your second one?
Do you mean about the lessons about like hanging in there?
Yeah, hanging in there. What the experience of having written one, what things translated to the second book.
Hmm.
Yeah, how maybe it was easier or maybe it was harder. Just those differences between the two.
Yeah, well, the second book was actually harder in
Yeah.
that the first book, it was one of those crazy lucky experiences where I had just written a piece that was published in the New York Times, like the on parent. I don't even it doesn't exist anymore. I think was called On Parenting,
Mm.
about why my husband and I, coming from different cultural backgrounds, had decided that we were not going to adopt when I thought that I was not going to be able to have a child. And an editor at an imprint of Penguin Random House read it and contacted me and said, would you be interested in submitting a memoir proposal? Like, I'll walk you through the whole process. So that was like hitting gold. And I got an offer, and then I had to find an agent and whatever. So that was the first book. The second book, I did not want to write a memoir again.
Yeah.
I ended up getting pregnant naturally at 45, and I had to like change the entire ending of the book because I thought it was going to be about like building this kind of fertile marriage without children, and how do you do that in this world. And then I ended up like this crazy lucky thing where I got pregnant naturally at 45, gave birth to a healthy baby at 46. And but then I realized I do not want to write another memoir, because now I have a little one who can't say like, I'm okay with you writing about our family. Like my husband is like, whatever. He's the first language isn't even English, so he's like he can kind of pretend it doesn't exist. But for the
Right.
little one, you can't do that. So anyway, so I came up with this. I found the story of the Yoneda family that I wrote about in my second book, and I really wanted to write about it. And my agent at the time said, You're not going to be able to sell this. Like it's just not. No one's going to be interested. Well, she didn't say no one's going to be interested. She said you're not. She was kind about it, but she was like, we're not going to be able to sell this. If you want to write another memoir, I'd be interested in, talking about that, but I can't work with you on this book. And so I thought about it, and I thought, uh, this is the story that I want to research. This is a story that I want to tell. And so I took the leap and severed my relationship with that agent. She was very generous and let me out of like the year-long pause that I was supposed to take between one agent and another. And I luckily found another agent. I just pitched, and we ended up selling the book. So I guess the things that I learned in between, I don't know if this is relevant for everybody, but for me, I kind of learned, or I kind of had confirmation of something I had sensed with the first book and then with my dissertation, which I did when I was in graduate school, which is that the story kind of chooses me. Like I can't, it's kind of some kind of alchemy that I can't reproduce myself, but I'll come across a story and it will grab me. And I will fall in love with it. And I can't make that happen. Just kind of like you can't make yourself fall in love with a person, maybe. Like, and then it's okay to say, I'm not giving up on it. Like, I'm even gonna not have an agent and try to find another. And just, sort of know that it's gonna be hard and it's gonna take a long time. And, the contract for this book, my first book came out from one of the big five publishers. The contract for this book was with a mid-size, not one of the big five. It was still commercial press, but with a mid-size. My advance was smaller. I knew that the marketing and I actually thought the marketing and publicity support was going to be much smaller because the advance was smaller. It ended up actually not being smaller. It ended up being great because I was like the bottom of the barrel at the big five, and
Yeah.
in the mid-size I was less the bottom of the barrel. So, but anyway, I it reconfirmed for me and also sort of helped enforce for me, one, I can't necessarily choose the stories. I sort of have to be patient and accept that they're sort of going to choose me. And two, that it will take hard work, and it will definitely feel like jumping off a cliff into nothing sometimes. And
Mm.
I just got to keep going. And I'm just have to remember how lucky I am that like a story has chosen me, and also that I have the kind of financial security and family support that I can, work on this without having financial pressure from it.
Yeah, there's a lot of great threads to pull on there, Tracy. But I also want to get a sense of overall writing. Just as maybe when you were like a baby writer and you were some advice that you leaned on from maybe a cherished mentor or maybe just hard won advice that if people asked you just how you keep going in the face of uncertainty and doubt and these forces at play. So just for you, what is something you like to lean on? Something that someone might have given you or something you just earned on your own?
I guess what I lean on when I feel like I'm not sure either that I can go on or that I should go on, because I'm not getting the progress or I'm not getting, the outside validation. I lean on two strategies. One is I read other, usually non-narrative nonfiction books, but sometimes just fiction books. Like I read and I remember why I have fallen in love with stories and with writing and with the way people can take just a story or a concept or even words and make something amazing out of it. And then I also listen to podcasts, and it really helps me hear other people talk about their work publicly, because it reminds me of like that there's my private experience of the story, and then there's the challenge of making that story matter to other people. Hearing how other people do that then makes me think, oh, here's how I may be able to like take my story. It's the difference between the situation and the story, right? Like, here's how I might be able to take the situation and really make it into really emphasize what's kind of the global story that matters to other people. And just seeing other people doing that and then thinking about how I might do that usually gives me that little push I need to kind of get back to work. There's actually a quote that I always think about that's in the beginning of your I don't know what it's called, but like your lead into the podcast. It's like the thing you play every time. And
Okay.
I don't know which guest said it. I've listened to many of them, but I didn't start listening in the very beginning, like years ago.
Yeah.
So I don't know which guest said it, but something like, it's a man's voice. And he says something like, this is going to have to matter to someone somewhere at some point. That's not verbatim perfect, but
Yeah, that was Dinty Moore and I love putting him as the final quote of every fresh montage I put together because it's going to have to matter to someone else other than me or something like that. And it's like, I think a good, that is definitely just a good North Star. Maybe early on in the process, it is mattering just to you. But then as you put on those reader goggles, you'd be like, okay, what is the universal? How can this serve a reader?
yes. And I guess part of that is also that reminds me of one other thing I rely on, which is to just have some small measure of faith that if this story has grabbed me, even if I can't explain why it matters, to have some faith that there's something in here that matters about the sort of the human condition, or the struggles that we kind of face in the modern world, or something. There's that just to have faith that we're not going to be grabbed by a meaningless story.
Yeah, and something you said a moment ago, in dealing with your old age and having that breakup, like so many people like who listen to this show and if the few times that I've spoken, say like with MFA students, like everyone is like desperate for representation. Like there's like, how do you get an agent and this, that? I totally get it. But here, like you had to have a tough conversation where you were actually having that breakup, and it's just like, oh my God, here's this thing that everyone covets, and like you had that, and there's like you had to have that conversation because this particular book wasn't going to be a good fit. It's just, how hard was that for you to have that conversation and to move on and try to find a different representation?
Yeah, it was hard. I mean, the conversation itself wasn't that hard, just because she was lovely, and it wasn't like we had a fight about it. And I
Yeah.
respected that she was honest. And so, but the leap that I
Yeah.
took, particularly being, an independent writer, it's not like I came from an academic background, so it's not like I'm in an academic community where, there's like tons of support and people who are in the same situation, like, kind of just sort of out here on my own working. And in this day and age to kind of have an agent and then to say, let's end our, business relationship is definitely scary, especially because my first book, came out from one of the big five, but it's not like it, like shattered any records. That's
Right.
putting it kindly. So it's not like I knew that, that there were going to be like agents banging down my door kind of thing. But I just went back to it's not even necessarily having faith in myself. It's kind of having faith in the story, like that there's something here that has really like sunk its claws into me. And I have to respect that. And I have to say, like, which would I rather do, kind of go down with the ship of this story or kind of jump ship and go to like a different story? And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to go to a different story. And I just had to trust it.
Yeah. Well, I know, like, so I've written 4 books and 2 are published. And one of the big lessons that I had from my MFA program from a mentor, as I was beating my head against the wall to sell that first one, was like, he was just like, he's like, Brendan, sometimes books don't sell and you just got to like move on to the next one. And that was a really hard pill to swallow, that sometimes we do, even if you believe in it, it's just not going to happen. So instead of getting so frustrated and bitter and annoyed, just maybe move on to something else. It takes book practice to get good at writing books, and there's never really a wasted word. So there becomes this odd, this incredible tension between the delusion it takes to believe in a story to sell it, and then on the other hand, to be like, well, maybe it's not, and I should move on. It's such a fine balance because you don't want to jump ship too early, but if you stay on too long, you run the risk of just wasting time and maybe ruining another opportunity. I don't know. How did you wrestle with that balance?
I mean, one thing I did was I wrote an article on a topic related to the book. So my book is about the only Japanese Jewish family on record in any of the concentration camps in the United States during World War II for Japanese Americans. I thought, let me see if I can try to get something published that's even tangentially related to the story. The family that I wrote about, their name is the Yonedas. And first of all, I found a descendant. So that helped.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also pitched an article on a related topic, which was the mixed marriage policy in and around the camps for Japanese Americans. Like what happens. The official name was the mixed marriage or mixed blood policy. The government used both names for the policy, but it was basically the policy that kind of defined and then policed and categorized families that were mixed race who had members of Japanese descent, and the decisions that the government struggled to make about these families. And so I published a piece for Densho, which is this amazing organization of Japanese American history. I published a piece for them about it. That sort of helped me figure out kind of what aspect of the Yoneda's story was going to interest people who might be interested in the book, that in sort of the broader story about this family that I wanted to tell. So that helped. That was sort of a pragmatic step that I took. And it also helped me get the book contract. So I knew like it wasn't going to be wasted time.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good way to, and not to get too mercenary about it, but it's a good way to test, well, whether there's enough material to sustain a book. If you can just do an article, you might write the article, but my God, I can only squeeze 1,500 words out of this. I thought it was a book, but my God, it's only 1,500 words. Cool. Wash your hands of that and move on. But then you get a sense of maybe how the audience is reacting to it, and the way it's out there interfacing in the world. Be like, okay, now there's a bit of appetite for this now.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And it doesn't have to be an article version of your book. Like there's only a bit of my book that's actually about the mixed marriage policy. The experiences that the Yonedas had in Manzanar, only some of those experiences were relevant to the fact that they were a mixed family. They were also prominent leftists, and that had much greater impact. Their sort of political view and the decisions that they made around their political view while they were in Manzanar had much greater impact on their experiences there and the upheaval that they faced than their mixed race background. It helped me figure out, like, one of the ways I am going to have to talk about this story if I'm going to get buy-in from different audience segments if I publish the book, like, what are the different things that I'm going to talk about? It was definitely a useful experience because, particularly I've gotten a really lovely support from both the Jewish American and the Japanese American communities and the communities around mixed identity. But, the Japanese American community, I've done more presentations and stuff that have focused on, the mixed marriage policy, whereas with the Jewish American museums or organizations that I have either talked with or am in the process of that I have talks scheduled with, and I'm in the process of planning what I'm going to talk about. It's been more about the tension for particularly Elaine Yoneda, who was the mother in the family, as a white Jewish woman who was vehemently opposed, obviously, to the Axis the Axis powers who were murdering her relatives in Europe. How did she and her husband, they were 100% similar politics, how did they agitate in support of the American government from inside an American concentration camp? So anyway, so they're two, quite different aspects of the story, but figuring out what aspect of the story can I work on first as an article helped me figure out what are the different conversation threads that then I can talk about, and not necessarily I have to publish an article that perfectly encapsulates like the story. That's a lot of pressure.
Oh, 100%. And when you were, you talked about your love of the research part of a project of this nature. So, like, just take us to the early genesis of this project and, what that research looked like and how you were, as you know, I love talking about organization and stuff like that. How were you curating all this material so you had that sort of the mise en place of a of a chef, but you're right. You had all those tools there for you. How did that look for you?
Well, I'm not very technically sophisticated, so I basically just used Microsoft Word and like the folder file system in terms of organization. But the research experience, I started working on the book proposal right before COVID hit, and I ended up having the breakup with my first agent like right as COVID started. And our kiddo was in kindergarten, and we're in Toronto, temporarily based in Toronto. And Toronto had, I think, the longest school closures of anywhere in North America. So my kiddo was home,
Wow.
doing Zoom school in kindergarten and then first grade. And but I was super lucky in that so much material about the forced removal and incarceration of the West Coast Japanese American community during World War II. So much of that material is actually online. Partly the government has put a lot of their documents online, and in great part, the Japanese American community has been amazing about collecting oral testimony and documents and family experiences. So I was really lucky in that I was able to do a lot of that research online, like, while my kiddo was, quote, in online school.
Yeah.
And I also got super lucky in that there were archivists so the Yoneda family, the couple that I wrote about, they were incarcerated with their 3-year-old son. So it wasn't just the couple, it was their son too. But before the war, they had been very prominent leftist activists on the West Coast. And they were kind of well known in the media for their leftist activism. And they had both Carl and Elaine, the husband and wife, they have archives in different libraries in California. And the archivists were amazing in that they copied and sent me for free, a lot of documents. And part of that, I think, is because it was COVID and there was no way the libraries were closed. But in great part, I think it's also just because archivists are like, superheroes
Yeah.
and they were amazingly generous. So that was sort of the logistics of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then how do you, file it at home? You said folders and Word and everything. It's that, we all have our own systems for accessing this material. What was how did that look like, for you as you're sitting down to write?
for me, the idea of like writing a book is so overwhelming. To start and then to think like, and okay, so I'm at like A and it's in by Z, I need to have a book. Like that's like so many steps in between. So what I do to manage my own kind of anxiety and overwhelm about that is I'm really, really obsessed with breaking everything into little steps so that
Yeah.
all I need to do is the next step and then I don't get overwhelmed. So my first step was basically to read the research that I came across and then to take notes on the research based, like I would just have a Word document and I would say, like I would have a heading and it would say like Elaine's childhood. And there were two biographies of her, focused mostly on her leftist activism. There had been nothing that was extensively written about the family's time in Manzanar, which is why I had a hunch that that I might be able to publish this because it was sort of filling a gap in the history, even though there were a couple of biographies of both the Yonedas that had been published by small presses or academic presses. But I would take notes on that and I would just break it up into different sections, Elaine's life before the war, and then whatever documentation we have about Elaine and Manzanar, and then, their different, arrests for their leftist activism before the war. They were both arrested repeatedly by the Red Guard, who I think is what it was called, the sort of anti-labor police force in California. I think seems like it was particularly brutal. And yeah, so I would just go through a lot of the research and I ended up going down a lot of rabbit holes, especially because there is so much information online. So I really wanted to have a robust collection of research and information about Manzanar and the conditions in Manzanar, because I also really wanted to be able to set the scene. And there's just so much documentation about each of the camps. So I would go, I sort of went down a bunch of rabbit holes, and some of that material I never ended up using, but it still was good in that it helped me get a sense for the environment. And then after sort of months of taking notes and separating those notes into different topics, I had a sense of like, okay, here are like the different topics that I found research about. Here's how I might be able to structure this into a narrative.
Yeah, the way the shape of a thing reveals itself over time it's satisfying when it happens, but it can be very nerve-wracking when you don't feel the shape coming into greater clarity. I know I dealt with that quite a bit with Prefontaine, just trying to find things that haven't been said before and trying to find the shape of it, what's important to highlight for sure. And, when in this process for you did, the shape of the story start to coalesce, you're like, okay, here's the momentum now.
Yeah, it was really when I was doing the research and I was, sort of clumping the information that I got by topic. And I realized that there was, this seminal experience that they had in Manzanar, which was, they called it the Manzanar riot. It's historians generally today call it the Manzanar uprising, which is the term that I use. But it was a very sort of violent event that happened in Manzanar towards the end of the time that Elaine and her son were there. Her son was basically targeted. Her husband had left at that point. Carl had left to go fight in the war. He was one of the first volunteers from the camps to sign up to fight for the U.S. military. And Elaine and her son, he had just left and they were alone, and a riot or uprising erupted. Her son, by a very small group of agitators, was sort of targeted for death in lieu of her husband, who had left the camp and had been in sort of fierce political opposition with a number of different groups within the camp. And I knew then, the more I researched the uprising, not just the information that I had about what the United's experience was, but the different people who were involved in it and the different sort of viewpoints, the more I researched that, the more I realized, well, this is like a climax. This can be a narrative high point. So it was really just I didn't know what the narrative high point would be when I started. And I just, again, sort of had to say, there's something pulling me here, and I just have to follow it. And with enough research, I think, and also enough reading, like then I would go and I would read other books and I would see how other people, created a narrative arc. And I, there's many different ways to build tension in a book. It doesn't always have to be something physically explosive. The whole concept of an internal struggle in some ways being the most powerful, even more powerful than external struggle. I really saw that in your book, like the different internal struggles that's Steve Prefontaine confronted. Those seeing how other people sort of crafted that also helped me figure out, well, here's what I'm finding in the research, and here's how I might be able to craft a narrative arc. But I didn't just start writing. Like then I did an outline of the book, and I knew I wanted to try to, do a proposal and get an agent, and then refine the proposal, and then hopefully get a contract, and then write the book. And I was lucky that that's how it happened. So again, but it was little steps. It was like easier for me to do if I just said, right now what I'm working on is kind of like a broad outline of the book and a sample chapter, because that's what I need. Once I do a query, if I'm lucky enough to get an agent who's interested in seeing a proposal, I need to have something to give them. So
Yeah. And with this book, in what ways did this book, become very personal for you?
Oh, wow. That's such a good question. So the book is personal to me from the get-go, in that, once I became pregnant and knew that we were going to have once we knew we were going to have a healthy child, because I didn't think I was pregnant at 45 after every doctor telling me you're never going to get pregnant. Of course, my husband was perfect. They were like, your husband's fine. You are the problem. Um, so, um, so once I realized that I was actually going to give birth to a healthy baby at 46 and a half, I realized, so my husband's Japanese from Japan. He's not Japanese American, he's from Japan. And I'm Jewish American. And I realized our kiddo was going to be the only Japanese American in our family. And I thought, I wonder about the heritage, the sort of history that our child is going to inherit. I didn't know whether or not, he was going to grow up to be, even identify like necessarily as Jewish, or even be interested in Japanese American history or whatever. But I was interested in the history that he might inherit. And so for me, finding the story of the only Jewish Japanese American family on record in any of these camps was automatically personal to me. And then I also grew up, because I grew up in a Jewish American family. I grew up in a Jewish American family on the East Coast, not on the West Coast. And my parents were super obsessed with the Nazi Holocaust and with making sure that, we were very exposed to what happened with the extermination camps and the slave labor camps in Nazi Germany. And I was kind of fascinated on a personal level. I think you can't really be human and learn about either the Holocaust or slavery or, what's happening in the world today. I don't think you can be human and not be haunted by that, basically. But so anyway, I was haunted by it, as one is. And to know, to learn the story of this Jewish American woman who was, trying to agitate for Allied victory from within a U.S. concentration camp, that also felt very captivating to me on a number of different levels. And just the fact that, we in the US, we had concentration camps. In Nazi Germany, they had extermination camps and slave labor camps. And I don't even think there's a point in equating or not equating them. I'm not saying they're the same thing, but we had our own race-based forced removal and incarceration in the US. And as an American, that feels deeply important to remember and to study and to think about. So for all those reasons, I felt a real personal connection.
Yeah, well, and this current administration is going out of its way to scrub this kind of history from the books, which makes a book like yours all the more valuable. And I'm so glad you were able to get the research you were able to get done, because who knows to what extent this stuff is going to be on a funeral pyre of information with this information. So how do you see, your book as it was birthed into, this culture that we're wrestling with now.
Yeah, I mean, it's sadly way more relevant than I thought it was going to be
Yeah,
today,
100%.
when I started working on it. I mean, I think there's obviously so many parallels between, targeting various communities in the United States, immigrant communities and the trans community, targeting various communities, with the trans community, particularly of citizens, American citizens, and trying to strip American citizens or American residents with the immigrant community of their civil rights and protections. I think the Japanese American community today, I feel like, is doing such an important and good job of shining a light on the ways in which the forced removal and incarceration of the Japanese American community is mirroring what's happening, particularly with the immigrant community in the United States, and how there are camps being set up and people being, without due process, being incarcerated in kind of scary situations. And but I also think it's important to remember that with the Japanese American forced removal and incarceration, 2/3 of those people were U.S. citizens. So this was happening to citizens. And it's not okay that it was happening to non-citizens as well. But that's why I say the camps were concentration camps, not internment camps, because an internment camp is a camp for foreigners. And only 1/3 of those 120,000 people who were incarcerated were immigrants, were foreigners. 2/3 were U.S. citizens who, with no due process and no reliable evidence at all of any danger, were forced to give up everything and move and incarcerated in these camps. For that parallel, I see something similar happening to the trans community. Not that the trans community is being incarcerated, although there are some bills that have come up that have suggested that, making trans identity punishable by jail. The move to paint certain communities as dangerous, when there's no evidence of danger, or no significant evidence of danger whatsoever, and to use this sort of false story about a danger to our society to either incarcerate or strip existing rights from residents or citizens. That is all. It's scary that stuff is happening again today.
Yeah, what was particularly chilling and haunting about reading your book was just hearing the echoes of the deep past today. And, in the Johnson Reed Act of 1924, just early on in the book, here are some things you cited, and it's like, Johnson, a passionate believer in eugenics. Johnson warned of an impending stream of alien blood, including a deluge of unassimilable and abnormally twisted Jews who he called filthy, un-American, and often dangerous in their habits. Reading stuff of that nature is just, it twists your stomach up because it's so gross. And the fact that we're still hearing echoes of that today is all the more troubling is an understatement, but it's all the more troubling.
Yeah, it just goes to show that truth is so much stranger than fiction. Like, it's just unbelievable that, politicians are talking about, poisoning the blood of the nation.
Yeah, there's another moment too. Is let's see who said this. According to Army Surgeon Major Charles Woodruff, he's speaking of the Jewish community, but like the same law applies to the Jew as applies to a bacillus or any other organism, which may be beneficial if few and in place, but deadly if numerous and out of place. And the dehumanization of people is like, it's the point with a lot of these people.
Yeah,
these people meaning the people in power.
Yes,
that's the point.
And also taking an entire community and saying this community is all the same. Like these are not humans. These are just evidence of danger, or these are not complicated people. These are symbols of something. Yeah, humans are a bummer.
Yeah, no shit.
The bottom line, humans are a bummer.
There's the Poe quote.
Exactly.
But even in so now this forced incarceration at Manzanar and among other places too. But you're right, by early March, calls in Congress began for stripping Japanese Americans of citizenship, Mississippi Congressman Josh Rankin read a letter on the House floor from a constituent proposing that after imprisoning Japanese Americans in concentration camps, quote, we must insist on keeping the sexes separate or they will use this internment time as an incubating period. And it's just like, I just wrote like, Jesus fucking Christ in the margin. I'm just like, this is... just the humiliation, the racism, the dehumanization just escalated so like throughout the war.
Yes. Yeah. And it's amazing that that really wasn't that long ago.
No, 60 set. Well, no, I'm sorry, like 80
It would have
years.
been like 80,
Yeah.
80 years ago. So yeah.
Yeah, and then the Idaho governor, said like of the Japanese, they breed like rats and should be sent packing to Japan or tossed into the sea. It's like, oh my God, like this is it's just beyond gross and not like you said, not that far back in the history.
Well, and the impetus to just be unbelievably cruel for propping up one's own position or one's own power or one's own base. We are seeing that again, and it is just really, it's beyond chilling, and there's just no words for it.
Oh, for sure. And I think what also struck me about the book is that, Carl, he was loyal to the United States to a fault. Here's this country that was just trying to make him and just dehumanize. Well, you keep using that word, and yet he's just like he leaned into the loyalty as a means to prove he was a good American. It didn't matter to the United States government by and large, but it also created a tremendous amount of tension within Manzanar. So like just talk about that tension among the incarcerees in Manzanar and like what the loyalty was doing to certain people, Carl in particular.
Yeah. So, one thing the research really gave me a really fascinating window onto was the people who had a different approach to the incarceration than Carl and Elaine. So Carl and Elaine felt very strongly that, first of all, they believed the lie that there was a potential for sabotage among the Japanese American community. In the earlier chapters of the book, the chapters that I think you were just reading from, shows how in the media there was this lie propagated that even among liberal thinkers and writers, that there was a threat from the Japanese American community, and the reason that we had seen no strike on the United States from within the Japanese American community was not because the Japanese American community was not dangerous, but because they were trying to lull us into complacency. So they believed that partly. They were, long-term leftists, and the leftist community in the United States made very, very clear that the only goal that mattered was the fight against the Axis, was supporting the Allies. And, when the Onedas were in Manzanar was 1942, the Axis was winning. It's hard to remember now because we know what happened after the war.
Yeah.
It really seemed like the Allies were going to lose for a long time. The Japanese and the Germans were both totally ascendant in the battles in the beginning. And they were terrified as leftists because, both the Japanese and both the Imperial Japanese and the Nazis sort of began their rampages actually against communists. For the Nazis, the Jews sort of came a little bit after. But so as leftists, they were terrified of the Axis powers. And then as a Japanese Jewish family, they, more and more evidence came out that they had intense reason to be, to fear that they just would not survive, if the Allies would continue to lose. So anyway, the leftist community made it very clear there's nothing we can prioritize other than supporting the Allies. And if the American government chooses to incarcerate the Japanese American community, and it may be a civil rights violation, we can't address that right now. That has to take a back seat. If and when the Allies win the war, then we can address it. And that was the position that Carl and Elaine embraced. And I believe they embraced it partly because they believed kind of the story that there was a threat from within the Japanese American community, and partly because it was very clear that if they were going to maintain their ties to the leftist community, first of all, they were kicked out of the Communist Party. They were members of the U.S. Communist Party, and all Japanese American members and their spouses were kicked out very soon after, in the days after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But if they wanted to continue their ties to the leftist media and the leftist community that they had been forced to leave behind when they were incarcerated, they had to sort of parrot the line that nothing matters. It doesn't matter whether or not we're incarcerated, and this entire community is incarcerated based on nothing but racism. It doesn't matter right now. What matters is that we support the U.S. government in its fight against the Axis. So there was that, which was the UNEDA's position, and they were not wallflowers. They were very loud and insistent in their opinions. And then there was the group of incarcerees in Manzanar, a small group. Most of the incarcerees just wanted to get through. They had lost everything and they just wanted to get through. They didn't know they were going to be locked up forever. They didn't know if they were, going to be, injured or hurt or killed. They just wanted to get through. But there was a small group of incarcerees who felt so betrayed by the U.S. government. Many of them were veterans. They had fought in the First World War. They were citizens, and many of them felt like, if we're going to be true Americans, we are going to say this is not the American way. Like, it is not American to accept a totally unjust incarceration without due process, and we will not accept it quietly. And so there was this, collision course between the UNEDAs and there's a small other group of leftists in the camp, and the people who felt this was important to just support the administration and not complain about being in the camps, and the people who felt like the exact opposite was needed. From hindsight, I can't but have compassion for both sides.
Yeah. Well, and then there's, at the heart of it as well is, well, why is Elaine in the camp in the first place? Well, her son, 3 years old, Tommy is, of mixed heritage, and they were going to put him in Manzanar by himself, as a toddler, because he just like everyone else was just unilaterally blamed as a threat. This kid, so Elaine has to kind of leave her, a teenager or tween daughter behind. Joyce, is that right?
Joyce, yeah, her white daughter from her first marriage.
Yeah. So she has to, leave Joyce behind, and then, of course, attend, Tommy into the camp, which brings her, into the camp. And the poor kid just had such health issues and stress issues. Yeah. And it's just, and that gives you an idea of just what, the circumstances under which, they were operating as they were at Manzanar.
Yeah, Manzanar was very close to lethal for Tommy, as it was for some other incarcerees first of all, some incarcerees were killed in the Manzanar uprising by the military police, by the U.S. military police. But beyond that, the environmental conditions were horrible. It was the desert. There were, violent dust storms. And for a child with severe asthma and allergies like Tommy, he was, it came close to killing him. And it did the same with a couple of other incarcerees who not just a couple, with incarcerees who had health issues, of which there were many, because if you had one drop of Japanese blood, if you were 6 months old, if you were 90 years old, you were considered a threat, and you had to go and be locked up in these, desert camps.
Yeah, so of course when they have to surrender to go to these camps, they have to give up their property, everything, their businesses, and when they are essentially evicted from Manzanar, they're given $25 a bus ticket, a one-way bus ticket, and like, good luck. And yeah. It's like, to me, it's just all the more tragic for everything they endured, is that the government didn't provide them restitution for this cruelty. It actually just compounded the cruelty.
Yeah, it was, not until the 1980s that the redress movement succeeded in having some compensation. There was a little bit of compensation. I think in the 1950s there were, people were able to, if they could show that they had lost their property and weren't able to recover it, they could get like a couple $1,000s. You had to be Japanese or Japanese American though for that. Like they didn't like none of the like Elaine was not eligible to receive compensation because even though she had been incarcerated, only people of Japanese descent were allowed to be compensated. And then in the redress movement in the 1980s, which Colin Elaine joined, the Japanese American community was able to get some kind of, I think it was $20,000 per incarceree. But yeah, when people left the camps, they were evicted after having given up everything and given what you said. I think it was $25 and a bus ticket, and off you go into this country that's still incredibly hostile to, the Japanese American community. And after you've lost everything.
Yeah, because even like late in the book, it's not like, oh, welcome back with open arms. Like the hostility remained. And so it's not like they were welcomed back into society. If anything, it was just society. They had to somehow integrate into a society that was almost as callous as Manzanar was itself. It's just, it's so like that's the thanks you get. It's like,
Yeah,
my
people
God.
were shot at when they came back. Their houses were lit on fire when they were in it. It was really quite amazing and incredibly
Yeah.
distressing.
Yeah, like
Um,
one attorney, he said like, this is a white man's country. Let's keep it so. It's like, good Lord. It's like
yeah, and the other thing that I learned from the book, from researching the book, which I never knew, having grown up on the East Coast and in a Jewish American family, my concept of World War II was that it was basically a fight against the Germans, against the Nazis. Like I knew that Japan was involved, but we didn't learn nearly as much about the Pacific War
true.
or about
Yeah.
the Japanese American forced movement incarceration. But when I was researching the book and reading these media reflections on the war as it was unfolding, it was amazing to see so much commentary about how the fight against the Japanese is a race war. The fight against the Germans is just a fight among family, among brothers. Like it was amazing to see how racially obsessed and split the country was. Again, not that long ago. Like to and that conception of people who were of Japanese descent being, because they had a different ethnicity, being somehow biologically distinct from white people, that continued as former incarcerees tried to resettle, and they faced a lot of, really traumatic experiences. It's like you said, it's unbelievable.
And when you were, writing the book, there are any number of, hurdles and pitfalls and doubts along the way. Just when you would, what was that experience like for you when you were in the heat of writing this?
Well, there were so many, I don't even know how to start.
I know. It's like, pick a card, any card. Pick a doubt, any doubt.
All right, I'm gonna pick a doubt that's like a little bit hard to talk about, but I haven't talked about it yet in any talks or interviews, and that is that, I was really aware, being a white person writing about the Japanese American incarceration, that I was going to have like blind spots. Um, and on one hand, I felt like I had a personal connection to the story, and that it was a story about a Jewish Japanese American family. And my family is Jewish and Japanese, although not Jewish and Japanese American in terms of my marriage. So I did feel like that was a real difference, an important difference to remember. I just had to, yeah. So I worried that I was gonna be like publicly say something offensive or ignorant. I still worry about it, but I just said to myself, like, the story and the period of history is more important, and I just have to be humble, and I just have to accept that, like, I may humiliate myself and say something that I'm like so embarrassed about later. Part of it was just kind of accepting that, like, I couldn't be precious about, my own blind spots. I had to kind of just accept that I might have them. And then also, I sought out a lot of feedback and help from various people in the Japanese American community who were unbelievably generous and kind with me, helped me steer clear, I think, of at least some blind spots or assumptions that I wanted to be careful not to make.
Yeah, that's really wise to seek out the sensitivity readers in some capacity when you're starting to maybe encroach being the wrong word, but you're starting to inch into territory that feels a bit like, do I have a right to be here? Is this my like, do I have a right to tell this story, or should I try to? Should somebody else be doing it? But yeah, recruiting those readers is such a great hedge against handling things poorly.
Yeah. And I people would say to me repeatedly, you definitely have a right to tell the story because, because there's not a lot of people who are in a Jewish Japanese families yet, there probably will be in, 50 years. But like, so in the very beginning, one of my friends said to me, why don't you fictionalize this? Like, it would be easier because I didn't know if I was going to be able to find enough material. It turned out that I definitely could find enough material, and I remember saying, absolutely not. Like, as a white person, I am not going to fictionalize because that's like completely projecting my like world vision on a story, and that I wasn't comfortable with doing, even if I felt like I might have the best intentions. I'm not saying someone else can't do it, but I just felt like, the history of the forced removal and incarceration has been understood and interpreted so frequently through, like, white American eyes, just even the way in which their camps are still called internment camps. It's still repeating the myth that this was something that happened to foreigners when in fact it happened to citizens. So I just I wanted to be really careful, even though I had some confirmation or support about the fact that it wasn't completely not my story to tell, at least the Uneda family, that I didn't want it to, I want to be very careful to just see what information I could find and follow that information and not project my own sort of value or interpretation on it. And that also not just being white, but not having had anybody who was incarcerated in one of the camps. I also felt like I had to be really careful in that way. It actually felt like in that part wasn't my story, and I need to be very careful.
Oh, very, very nice. Well, Tracy, it is masterfully told. Like, I think it's it's an important book for people to read, just to know about the history, because I think a country we can be proud of is one that can stare at itself, warts and all, and learn from that. And that's a country I want to live in. And it's not the country that's being steered right now, but I think this is a necessary history, and I'm so happy to have read it and to have a conversation about it. So it's just masterfully done. I just hope a lot of people pick this book up and read it and really metabolize it and take that good hard look at that history.
Thank you so much. This is such a treat to be able to talk to you about it, especially after listening to your episodes the entire time I was writing it. It really helped.
Fantastic. Well, that's awesome, Tracy. And as you know, as a longtime listener, I love bringing these conversations down for a landing by asking the guest, you in this case, for a recommendation of some kind, just anything you're excited about. So I'd extend that to you.
I do. Look, I even have it here where you told me that you might video it. I have two things. Is it okay if I do two things?
Of course. Yes.
Okay. One is just general, and that is my espresso maker.
Nice.
I don't even know how you pronounce it. I think it's Bialetti. So I'm a big fan of this, and this helped a lot. Your podcast and this helped me. Besides the research and being able to interview descendants of the Oneda family, I can credit you and my espresso pod. So, and it's totally cheap. It's not like you don't have to, it's not like one of these fancy things. So
nice.
Even if you get a small book contract, you could still afford it. So that's one recommendation. And then the other one is actually more serious, and that is that for people who are interested in learning more about the Japanese American forced removal and incarceration, this is a fantastic book. It came out after I started writing my book, but it's called The Literature of Japanese American Incarceration. It's Penguin Classics, and it's edited by Frank Abe and Floyd Chung. And Frank is, I don't know a lot about Floyd Chung, but I know Frank relatively well, and he has done so much important work about resistors in the camp. So the group of people who would have been kind of had opposite politics to Elaine and Carl, actually. And he's a descendant of the camps, and he and Floyd Chung just have collected this incredible volume of writing from the camps, from people who are in the camps, and also from their descendants.
Oh, wow.
So it's just a really good way to start if you're interested in learning more about the forced removal and incarceration as a whole.
Fantastic. Well, Tracy, this is so great. I'm so glad we were able to have this conversation about your book and how you approached it. So just thanks for carving out the time to do this.
Me too. This was such a treat. Thanks, Brendan.
Yes. Awesome. Thanks to Tracy for coming on the show. She's been a longtime supporter of the podcast, and I'm glad that it was a good companion to the book writing process. That's what I like the show to be. I like it to be kind of your wingman. I'm your wingman. Now let's go out there. Let's go out there and crush it. For show notes and more, BrendanOmara.com. Hey, and you can also subscribe to the Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter and Pitch Club. Welcome to pitchclub.substack.com. Love to see that blow up, as the kids say. So of late, my days have been largely unsatisfying from a work perspective. Such is being an independent and freelancer type. When you're not working, you're not getting paid. The flexibility is a perk, but it can feel like if you're not on the hustle, then you're dying. Which is, I had a conversation with another freelancer another day, and she was just like burned out and frustrated. I'm like, can you take a break? She's like, I can't take a break. I felt sorry for asking the question, but that's the nature of freelancing sometimes. Just like if you take a break, then you're out of it. Unlike if you're got a barista gig, even if the cafe is empty, you're still earning your wage. Plus the employer handles all your withholding, so what's in your paycheck is actually yours to do what you want with. Anyway, ever since I put the front runner to bed, my time has been really squishy. Obviously I churn out these podcasts and it's a lot of work, and at Pitch Club, which is in and of itself a lot of work, though it's only once a month. But without the structure of the writing and the research of the front runner and that deadline, it's very easy for me to kind of get distracted by bullshit and fritter my time away on house chores, walking, grazing in the kitchen, all manner of household appointments that fall to me because I have a flexible schedule. So vet appointments, car appointments, grocery shopping, cooking, mediocre house cleaning, yard work. And what happens is many of these tasks, speaking nothing of, say, chronic email checking and the all too frequent checking of Instagram, especially on days when I post something, because then you're looking for the dopamine hit, like who liked it, who didn't. How is the algorithm going to titrate a couple red hearts for me? Is that all these things like bleed together. So instead of all these beautifully delineated colors on your palette, I end up having like this muddy brownish green slop. And by the time the day is over, I can't even tell you what I've done. Even if I catalog it in my bullet journal and be like, just keep it's also my to-do list is there, but it's like sometimes you do other things that are not on your to-do list, and you can catalog the things you did. And even when I look at that, I'm like, that's it? What the fuck happened all the time? This is where 3 vital things came into play that helped me have one of my more satisfying days in the studio. This is just the other day. It's like I can count them one Ninja Turtle hand how many really good days I've had, and the number is 1. So anyway, this is kind of what happened. So like, first thing, actually defining what a good day looks like. As freelancers, there's often a mix of contract work or creative work, research, outreach, self-promotion, other promotion, exercise, reading, napping, book work maybe. If there's no subjective definition of what it means to have a good day, then nothing you do will ever measure up. You'll always head to bed with that gnawing feeling of not having done enough, or worse, questioning what the hell you even did. 2, for me, is putting my phone out of reach, and even better, out of eyesight. It's like, if it's beside me, it might as well be like a bowl of fucking M&Ms and saying, don't eat those, don't eat those, B.O., don't eat those. And listen, I know they're not vegan, but I don't eat M&Ms anymore. But if they make plant-based M&Ms, holy fuck, watch out, world. Ideally, on my best days, the phone is out of the room, but with the ringer on, because if someone calls me, that's usually important. Or custom text ringtones, so I know whether I should get up or not. Like Melanie's ringtone, I know when it's her. 3, time blocking, but not a very strict time blocking. It's more fluid, and by that I mean you don't start your morning like Cal Newport might tell you and block out your entire 8-hour day off the bat. Unless you have really concrete appointments that are easy to box off, by all means do that. He has this thing, you time block the whole day, and then, things change, and then you create a new column and shuffle things around. But I always struggle to, have enough, how much time at 7 a.m. should I be budgeting for X task? So it's kind of like as I start nearing that goal line or the red zone or whatever, I have a better idea. I'm like, oh yeah, I feel comfortable budgeting this hour or this 90 minutes to this, and then I can block it off. And then it's a matter of forecasting those next 3 hours with certain tasks. And say for me, maybe editing and packaging a podcast, done. I'll block it out for a few consecutive hours with maybe a 10-minute walk break or stretching breaks every hour. But that's the only focus of those blocks. That's all for those blocks. And, nothing else. I have to fight my urge to, when I finish, or I've sat there for 10 or 15 minutes to go snack on peanut butter, get up. It's no, practically have to handcuff myself to the chair, put a time lock on my door or something. It hasn't come to that yet, but it might. And the other day, I blocked off an hour to catalog articles for newspapers.com about a particular era of my central figure's life in this new biography I'm working on. And it reminded me how much I love being in the archives, digital or real, and how your people come to life in new and exciting ways. And when that hour block was up, I was bummed it was over. And after this day, a very concrete task with very concrete time with actual focus, I was actually satisfied with what I finished. I find it no coincidence that I slept through the night for the first time in months. I don't expect this to happen all the time, but it was nice. I woke up and I looked at my watch and it was 5:05, and I usually get up around 5:15. I was like, holy shit. Either I woke up in the night and don't remember, or I slept through the night, which it never happens. It's always book panics. But like I said at the top of this parting shot, time before that had been very squishy. But when I firmed it up, defined it, budgeted it accordingly, I was left feeling good about the day and good about the way the time was spent, and in a way that energized me for the next day, in a way I hadn't felt in quite some time, a long, long time. None of this is revolutionary or new. Time blocking is nothing new. Putting your phone in another room is nothing new. Defining what a successful day looks like to you is nothing new. Really, that Triforce helped me take back a bit of what I could control. And a lot of that control over the months and previous weeks, I had just been ceding to other forces, going with the flow a little too much in a very unsatisfactory way. Sometimes leaning into what's inconvenient is actually the best thing. You want to feel the effort, feel the rigor, and not just bounce along. Anyway, that's what I'm thinking about. Maybe I can replicate that. If I had 1 or 2 of those days a week, I'd probably be pretty happy. So stay wild, CNFers. If you can't do, interview. See ya.